Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Happy Wellness Wednesday. I hope you're having a fabulous day already. Just for the record, for the sake of recording it, I'm in Florida and it is 32 degrees this morning. So this is hopefully our last cold snap this cold for a bit. Generally, we do still get like one more between April and May, but it shouldn't be as cold as it is this morning. But I won't complain because I know I have friends up north that are under ice and snow again. If you are just stumbling on my page, my name is Donna. I'm a mom, a nana, a girlfriend, runner, jazzerciser. I work part-time remotely. I am a grad school student studying for my Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling. And I have been on a lifelong journey with anxiety and depression. Most of the time I consider myself to be in recovery, but I do sometimes find that anxiety specifically is pretty ramped up, which has been lately. And I started Wellness Wednesday because of that lifelong journey and because I've learned that peer wisdom works and that when we share tips and tricks, maybe commiserate a little bit with each other, it helps. It helps to learn what other people are doing. It helps to learn new things that we can try and just try to apply to ourselves. Sometimes it's like throwing spaghetti noodles at the wall. You just keep trying new things until you find the things that work for you because not everybody's the same. But you have to share information in order to find new things to try. So in any case, last week, if you've been following me for a while, last week we talked about decision fatigue, and I will drop the link to that video on Facebook in the comments. Now, one of the reasons I started a YouTube channel to put these on later, of course, I only go live here right now, but one of the reasons I started a YouTube channel to put these things on later is because I actually... in the process of putting this together, I was put in mind of a video I did back in 2023. So I will find that on my YouTube channel. I will drop that link in the comments as well. In any case, this week, along with a few reflections, snowballed into something else that I felt really needed to be talked about. And this one may end up just being a little bit longer than usual because I had a rough night last night. I didn't sleep that well, so I may be a little bit rambly. I'm going to try not to be. I always have an outline with notes to try to stay on topic, but that doesn't always work. So this one may end up being a little bit longer than usual, but I think it'll be worth it. And if you saw the caption, when you saw me go live, you may have the song by David Bowie and Queen echoing in your head, because I have ever since I came up with this topic. So of course that's a David Bowie and Queen reference. I love my music. So there's, if I can find a way to reference it in some way in my Wellness Wednesdays and anything else I do, I'm always going to. In any case, if you're here, let me know you're here. If you don't see this till afterwards, hit hashtag replay in the comments. Facebook does not always show me when you are on. Sometimes it'll show me comments. Sometimes it'll show me when you say good morning. If I don't respond, it's because Facebook decided not to show me, but I will always respond afterwards. So let's get started. Under pressure. This is something I need to talk about. So I'm hoping that means that other people need to hear it because a lot of times Wellness Wednesday, I am studying to be a mental health counselor, but I'm not one yet. So most of these Wellness Wednesdays come from my own experiences. These topics develop from my own experiences. That means they're stories, and hopefully you can find something useful out of today's. So why are we harder on ourselves than anyone else? And you're going to need a little background as to how I got to this topic. So in the process of reflecting after last week's video on decision fatigue, which a lot of times can be from having too many choices, having too much pressure, last year, I talked about, or not last year, in 2023, I talked about great expectations, because that's kind of where my brain went, kind of what led to me choosing this topic. And that great expectations was about the expectations that we perceive other people put on us, or the expectations that we have of other people, and how that often leads to disappointment. Here's the truth. Sometimes those expectations are expectations that we have on ourselves. And we don't know why we have those expectations. A lot of times they are a mirror of other people's, the world's, whatever. But a lot of times we put ourselves under a lot of pressure with our own expectations. We don't always realize it's us that's doing it. And then when outside pressure comes in, we are much more likely to just explode, like think pressure cooker, or geyser rather. We are just more likely to explode because we've already put so much pressure on ourselves that when that outside pressure comes in, it's too much. It puts us over the top. So that's kind of why I was mentioning the video from a couple years ago. And again, I'll drop that video in the link because I think it'll be good background for you if you never saw the Great Expectations video. So how did I get to this topic today? Well, I was doing a task. Good morning, Miss Beverly. I was doing a task for my job that discussed comparison. And it discussed giving yourself grace, which led to reflection on my school term, which I have literally just finished. I have like one discussion response to go and I'm done with the term. And it's been a challenging term, not because, because the subject matter was challenging in a different way than the previous one. I was in research methods and I understand all of the concepts in research methods. However, as articulate as I am and as good as I am with words, I really struggle to articulate my understanding in the academia that's required of grad school, if that makes sense. Like it's like, I want to say it this way. Hey, the dog is brown. But academia and research methods requires that I say the dog is brown because blah, 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 blah. And this is who else wrote about that to support that theory, if that makes sense. So it's been and Beverly, I think you understand that. It's been very challenging, and I'm reminded of why I never wanted to go into research as a profession. But in any case, this task that I was doing for work led me to reflect over my term. And y'all, this last couple weeks of my term was really, really tough. And it was tough because I had a couple of mini meltdowns. And you might be surprised at the reasons that I had those mini meltdowns. One was over a grade on a paper. Now, let me be clear right out of the gate. The grade was not bad. It was a middle A on a grad school paper, which is phenomenal. Okay. But when I got the grade, it was actually the lowest grade that I had received since I started grad school. There's a reason I'm being as specific as I am. It was the lowest grade I had received since the beginning of grad school. And I freaking snapped, y'all. I just was like, what the hell? I didn't understand some of the feedback from the instructor. I did understand some of the feedback from the instructor. At the grad school level, I find that it's rare to find an instructor that is as explicit with feedback as this particular one is. And while I appreciate that, I also get, it adds to my frustration when I lose points and there's not an explanation as to why. So these are all things that are going to make sense to you in a few minutes. Just bear with me. So I kind of snapped over this grade, for several reasons. The ones that I knew right away why I was kind of snapping over the grade was because, again, it was the lowest grade I had received since I started grad school. And that's important. Good morning, Miss Heather. And two, because this particular instructor doesn't grade things until like a week out. So if you're trying to work ahead, which I am all the time, and that's going to be important in a minute here too. If you're trying to work ahead like I am all the time, because I have a lot of other stuff going on and it's important to me to make sure my assignments are done on time or early so that I can make time for things like my daughter's birthday, which was kind of a whole weekend event. So I can make time to volunteer for an event that my previous job puts on, because there's still a little tiny piece of my heart for that job. And because my boyfriend is still heavily involved. So I want to be able to help at least on the day of the event. So anyway, so there were all these little things, that made me frustrated because my grade could have been better if I'd have had the feedback from the previous and blah, 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 all these things. Okay. You kind of get the idea. So, and in addition to that, because I was working on my week 9 assignment, these are 10-week terms, and I was hell-bent on having all of my week 10 stuff done by this past Sunday so that I could have an extra week of school break. Basically, this all resulted in a complete mini meltdown, or if you saw my graphic yesterday that I posted about today's video and it was a geyser exploding, that's essentially what went down in the last 2 weeks. I was making myself freak out because of unrealistic expectations. Does that sound like anything you're familiar with? And because I was shoulding all over myself. Shoulding. As in I should have, she should have. You get my drift? So if you're familiar with either one of these concepts, keep going. You just stay with me because I'm going somewhere. So I don't know if I said good morning, Miss Heather, but good morning. So here's the problem. The longer you hold a streak, and I don't want to dive too much into my grades. But I am very proud, and pride is sometimes an issue too. I'm very proud of the fact that since I began grad school, I've carried a 4.0. I wasn't going to get that specific. But here's the problem with that. And I know the person that graduated lowest in their class is still called doctor. I've heard all this before. I understand it. I've had to come to terms with it. I like the higher grade because it validates me. And it's hard for me to admit that I still need some kind of external validation because I thought I was past that point. Because needing external validation helps to breed our pressure and our anxiety, right? We kind of already know that. And the problem is that the longer you hold a streak, the heavier it gets, or the more you feel like you need to protect it. Think about, certainly you've known someone, perfect attendance used to be like a really big thing that people strove for. So if you've ever known somebody, maybe it's you, maybe it's somebody you worked with, maybe it's somebody you went to school with in high school who got an award or got a commendation for having perfect attendance. The longer you go, yes, Beverly, yes, and I'll get back to that in a minute. We have to take should out of our vocabulary, absolutely. And like I said, a lot of this here in the beginning, just bear with me because all of these little things I'm hitting on are all important. So I'm glad you said that. So think about, like I said, somebody who's had perfect attendance and then one day, beyond their control, they are so sick or something happens that just prevents them from getting to work, school, whatever. If they've had perfect attendance for 5 or 6 years, that's going to be a meltdown. It's going to be a meltdown. It's going to be a huge disappointment because even though they can't necessarily control why they can't be where they're supposed to be, they've had that streak for so long that it becomes heavier. So like this pen, I'm going to step back. All right. If I hold out this pen isn't very heavy, right? But if I hold this pen for this entire video and longer, it becomes the heaviest pen that has ever existed on the face of the earth because I've been holding it for so long that my arm is tired. My arm is used to this position. And so when I finally break down and I can no longer hold it, the longer I've held it, the more upset I am. Does that make sense? Good morning, Miss Patricia. You missed a little bit of background, so you'll want to make sure and go back and watch this from the beginning when I'm done. So I wanted to try to give you a visual, and that was the best thing I could think of. The longer you hold a streak, or whatever you want to call it, or the longer you are consistently good or the best or whatever at something, the heavier that gets to carry. It's just the truth. So there was another memory that kind of popped up in all of this. And again, just bear with me. I told you this one was going to be a little bit longer today because I have stories, and stories always make it a little bit longer. So as I was working on this topic and reflecting on these things, something else came to mind. And it was a memory from high school psychology. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to hold it together when I talk about this, because when it hit me, and it's something I haven't thought about in a long time, when it hit me, it really hit me. So I was in high school psychology. I think it was my sophomore year. The teacher was Mr. Chowick. And this was back in the days, and I've said this before. If you followed me for a while, you've heard me talk about it. Nowadays, if you take psychology and sociology in high school, it's like 1/2 of a semester. It's a marking period. It's 4.5 weeks of each. Back then, it was a full semester of each. So, and this was when I first discovered my love for psychology and trying to understand the brain, okay? In any case, I was in this class, and I have this distinct memory, and I actually had forgotten all about it until a few years ago, and it popped up out of nowhere. You guys remember the projectors, like the projectors that put an image on the wall or on a big screen so you could trace it or whatever? I'm showing my age now. And so I was working with a partner, and I was standing at the wall like this. I'll back up a little bit so you can see me better. I was standing at the wall like this with my fingers at the corner of where the projector screen was putting the image so that I could show my partner where I thought, how big and where I thought we should be drawing, whatever it was we were doing. I don't even remember what we were doing. So I was standing like this, and my instructor walked in the room. And he said, Donna, he said, turn around. So I turned around. And he said, no. Go back and put your hands the way you had them and turn around. And so I did. And he said, you're not responsible for everybody. You can't save the world. Y'all, I was a sophomore. And I didn't really understand that at the time. But when I reflected back on that, it's been intense. Because he saw me taking responsibility, extra responsibility, for things that weren't mine to take. You guys get the comparison, right? He saw me taking responsibility for things that weren't mine to take when I was like, however the hell old I was, 14, 15 years old. So fast forward to towards the end of the year when I had to back off on my jazzercise plan, because I was so busy that I just wasn't getting there. So I reduced my jazzercise plan because I was lucky to be getting there once a week. And my, the person in charge, the person I was chatting with about changing that plan said to me, we'll still be here when you're done saving the world. And that immediately took me back to this incident in high school. And so as I was reflecting on all of these things, why we're harder on ourselves, why I'm harder on myself, these are things that came up in my memory too. These are things that I went back to, and I was like, okay, there's a message there. So keep all that in mind. I know that was a lot. Just stay with me. So why do we do this? Why are we so hard on ourselves? Well, some of it's conditioning and self-talk. And a lot of this is going to be about self-talk because you guys know this is my favorite soapbox, and it's never a shocker when we talk about self-talk. When we talk about self-talk, when we speak of self-talk, good morning, Miss Raquel. Patricia, good morning to you if I didn't say it. Yes, I did say it. Y'all, I told you I'm losing my noodle a little today. So conditioning and self-talk is one of the primary reasons we do this. I know that's a huge shock, right? Some people believe also that childhood experiences come out in our inner voice. Like there are some people that believe that what our parents tell us when we're growing up is what becomes our inner voice. That's the inner voice we hear. I'm hard pressed to argue based on my own experiences, but mine, I think, leans more towards my experiences in general, not just my parents, if that makes sense. There was a lot of bullying. There was a lot of, and we've talked about this before, a lot of us growing up in that generation in general, where we were taught not to talk back. So we essentially, we often got in trouble for that. So we were essentially in some ways taught that our voice did not matter. And so then that becomes an inner voice that says you have to do things that make you matter. But that usually means we have to do things that make us matter to other people, not necessarily to ourselves, to our higher power, whatever we believe in. So sometimes, a lot of times, this starts out with conditioning, however we grew up. In my case, I grew up feeling the need to be validated. Absent father, volatile relationship with my stepfather and my parents in general, being bullied in school, being the weird kid, being the outsider, There's just a lot of things that went on that made me feel the need to seek validation because I basically felt like I never did anything right. And I'm seeing that in my grandkids sometimes, but that's a story for another day. So I'm hard pressed to argue on the logic that our experiences as children become our inner voices, in that respect. Also, we have this safety, and we've talked about this before too. Some people call it the reptilian brain, the survivor instinct. We have a safety or a default mode. And this article from Psychology Today actually describes it as a default mode network, which is that our automatic thoughts keep us safe. Our automatic thoughts keep us safe. It talks about a brain circuit that helps people survive by aligning their interests with clan norms. That would be what we perceive that everybody else expects of us. There's those expectations again, right? So following the standards of the group, we stay safe. If we step out of the lines, we risk ostracism and potential death. Now, most of the time, we don't risk potential death anymore. Yeah, let's not even get into the political side, because we don't like to go there here. But it's a brain circuitry that is part of our of our default network, if you will. So the funny thing about these automatic thoughts is they are designed to keep us safe, which means they often turn negative. No, you can't do that. No, you shouldn't go there. No, you shouldn't. There's that word again. But this is also the same network that tells us to be empathetic of other people and to support others when they are struggling. You see where I'm going with this? We tend to be a lot easier on someone else experiencing the same thing than what we are on ourselves. Am I making sense? Let me know if you think I'm making sense. Okay. So another reason we do this, fear of failure, seeking of self-worth, validation, acceptance. See how all these things go hand in hand? Comparison. Problem is that sometimes, especially as we age, and I find I do this more and more because there's a lot of great quotes that are like, the only person you should be comparing yourself to is the person that you were before the day before. That can get really, really slippery, y'all. Because as we start to age, I'm 52 years old, I go out on a run and I compare myself to where I was 10 years ago, and I'm like, you're a slacker, you've got to do better. And all of a sudden, I'm in a negative brain spin about all the things I can't do now. So while that's great in theory, and I've used those quotes myself, we have to be really careful that that doesn't turn into a whirlwind of negative self-talk about how we're not as good as we once were. There's another music reference for you. We're not as good as we once were, and we're never going to be again. Because that's not necessarily true. But that's how slippery that slope can be. Okay? So you can see how all these things often go hand in hand. The negative self-talk, the need for validation, the safety mechanisms in our brain, the conditioning, high-functioning anxiety, and the need to control, which also goes hand in hand with the next thing on my bullet list, which is perfectionism. Those things kind of all go together. So the whole grade incident, I felt the need to control. I thought I was in control. I thought I had everything under control. So when this grade came back lower than what I was accustomed to, and this particular instructor didn't give me the feedback to make me feel like I could take that feedback and apply it and do better, I lost my noodle. Y'all, there's nothing wrong with the grade. It essentially boiled down to a 95 on the paper. Or no, maybe this one was, there was two. Maybe this one was the 90 something. It was like low 90s, but the only real reason I was freaking out was because it was the end of that streak. It was the lowest grade I had gotten. I was worried about losing that 4.0. It became not about whether or not I learned from the material, not about the rest of the feedback that the instructor gave me that was brilliant. Forget the fact that it was becoming obvious that that instructor didn't give anybody full points on any section of a paper. What it really boiled down to was that pen, that streak, it was getting really heavy and I dropped it. And I didn't even really drop it all the way. I just kind of put it down for a minute and I lost my noodle because I no longer felt like I was in control. I felt like something was out of my control and I couldn't I couldn't. And then there's that whole perfectionism side. That's just a whole separate topic we can get into about perfectionism. So high functioning anxiety, and high functioning anxiety in this instance, we're defining as anxiety that you use to motivate you, but that becomes negative. High functioning anxiety can be really helpful, especially when you're in a grad school situation, a job, a high performing job. High functioning anxiety can be useful when you use it correctly. But when you start using it against yourself too much, like what I just spoke about, you used to be better at this, you used to be able to run faster, whatever, then it becomes very dangerous and very negative. So, and then again, back to my story about high school, one of the number one things that causes us to put a lot of pressure on ourselves is because we are carrying responsibility that is not ours for longer than we should. Because a lot of times the reason that we feel the need to perform at such a high level or put this pressure on ourselves is because we perceive that we're responsible for other people's feelings, other people's successes. This is huge as a parent. It's huge as a parent. When you feel like you have to be that best parent, that cool parent, that parent that makes sure their kid grows up to be the perfect U.S. citizen, whatever. So we often create the continued pressure from things that once started as an accomplishment also. We'll get there in a minute. But we carry responsibility that's not ours for longer than we should. We feel like we're responsible for... I had a job that I was in way too long because I felt personally responsible for the success of that organization. That wasn't reasonable because there was only a tiny chunk of that whole scenario that I could control. And I see it a lot of times, especially in nonprofits that work with volunteers a lot. Volunteers are volunteers. Sometimes they're volunteering until they find another job. Sometimes they're volunteering until until they move to another place. There's a lot of ifs when it comes to volunteering. So it's easy to lose a volunteer for various reasons, but we suddenly, when we feel the need to control and we feel the need to carry responsibility, we sometimes feel responsible for all of that. And so when things shift beyond what we expected, there's that magic expected word again, we kind of, it's like added stress because we're putting all this pressure on ourselves already to make sure everything's perfect and to make sure everything succeeds. So we often create continued pressure. Sometimes that continued pressure, like I said, back to the streak for a minute, starts with one thing that started as an accomplishment and then it becomes a streak that we have to carry, such as, see if any of these sound familiar. Let me know in the comments. If they do, raise your hand, whatever. Streaks, fitness, sobriety, GPAs, attendance. We get on an exercise wagon. We do really well for 3 or 4 months. We fall off the wagon. That is when we add pressure to ourselves because we're like, okay, I've been going to the gym for 3 months and every day for 3 months and I need to keep going. And even though my muscles hurt and my body's tired and I have a limp, I still need to go because I've been going for every day for 3 months and I can't miss a day. That's what I'm talking about. Does that make sense? Also, a lot of times this looks like being the reliable or the strong one. You become the reliable one at work or the reliable one in your family. And then you feel this continued pressure to be that person, even when you're nowhere near in a place where you can be. Being the reliable one, being the strong one. It's hard being the strong one all the time, right? Right? And then there are some days where you just don't feel capable of being strong, but you feel like you're expected to be because you have been. Is that expectation really coming from somebody else or is that coming from you? Because that pen's up there and you've been holding it for a while. It's getting heavy, right? So being the high performer at work, we kind of already touched on that, or being the one that always has it together. These are all a lot of the reasons that we put pressure on ourselves. So whatever I said may not have been specific to you, but you may be able to look at your job or your responsibility within your family or whatever the case may be, some place that you are volunteering for and go, oh, I see that now. So how do we stop, right? How do we stop? Well, Another Psychology Today article, and I really like Psychology Today. Most of the articles are pretty comprehensive. Again, it's on the internet. You got to vet it. You got to filter it. But a lot of these things that were listed in this article were also listed in several others, and are also things that you've heard me talk about before. They're things I know. They're things you know. But sometimes they're things that are hard, even though we know them, to apply. How do we stop? Well, we become aware. That means we recognize when we're expecting too much of ourselves and we set realistic goals. So me trying to push to get this massive terms and concept document done, not only by its due date, which was Sunday, but also to have the next week's worth of work done, was not realistic. I was putting too much pressure on myself. And I realized that Saturday when I was still only about halfway through the document and it was due on Sunday night. And one of the reasons that I was having a mini meltdown over this assignment on Saturday was because I wanted to have it done by the end of the day Saturday so that I could work on my last week's worth of stuff on Sunday and be done and walk away a week early. That was a lot of pressure to put on myself. A lot of pressure. So that's where the should have started, okay? That's where the should have started. The should have started with you, well, you should have worked on this harder throughout the term. Even though I was working 2 weeks ahead on assignments to make sure I had time for family and community events, it wasn't enough. It was, you should have done this and you should have done that. She should have given me my grade earlier and you should have understood this better and you should have done this more. And it became me shooting all over myself. Sound familiar? So awareness is recognizing when you are doing that, when you are expecting too much of yourself and setting realistic goals and backing off. Basically just backing off of yourself. Mindfulness comes into play here. We've talked about mindfulness before. Reframing things, because how this shooting all over yourself starts are those little thoughts in your head. You should have done it this way. You should have done this sooner. You should have been up an hour earlier. You can keep going. You can fill in the blank all day, but you know what that sounds like. It's like a constant poke in your brain. I had an ex that when he got mad at me, had his finger right here and was like, you can't, you can't, you can't. That's what that sounds like up here. Okay, that's what that negative self-talk sounds like. And we can think we have that negative self-talk under control until we get into situations that threaten our comfort zone, that threaten our streak, that threaten our whatever. And all of a sudden, there it is. There's that finger poking. Should have. So mindfulness helps us reframe that, redirect it, ignore it. Sometimes you just have to ignore it. That's really hard. Not everybody recommends that. Mindfulness allows us to go, okay, yeah, there's that thought. I don't have time for it right now. Mindfulness also allows us to go, okay, well, I have this thought, but I don't need to dissect it right now. I don't need to label it right now. I don't need to figure it out right now. Because when we have those thoughts and then we're like, yeah, and I should have done this too, and I should have, the next thing we know, we're spinning in circles because of a thought that we let get into our brain. And an hour later, I am freaking out, having this meltdown over this paper, instead of working on it. However, the good news is that I recognized the mini meltdown as it was occurring, and I stopped and I dealt with it, and I went and I meditated for a few minutes, and I came back and I was so much better for the rest of the day working on that paper. So mindfulness is important. It allows us, if we're paying attention and we're becoming aware of what we're doing and of the pressure we're putting on ourselves. Like, is this a self-set deadline or is this a deadline someone else set? How important is this deadline? Is anybody going to die if I don't hit this deadline? Those kinds of things. When we start being aware and recognizing when we're expecting too much of ourselves, it's not reasonable to expect to write an entire 4 to 6 page paper in a day. That's not reasonable, which means my expectations on myself were based on trying to get more done than I should have been trying to do in the course of the weekend. Okay? So awareness, mindfulness, self-talk, and self-compassion. Again, you know this is my favorite soapbox. When that negative spin starts, we have to stop and think, how would we talk? And that's talked about here too in that article. How do we talk to others? Because we need to talk to ourselves the same way. Every time I talk about this, I get way up here and I look at you and I say, do not say anything to yourself that you would not say to the person that you love the most in this world. We have to have compassion on ourselves. And that's part of how we stop that. We recognize unrealistic expectations, and then we treat ourselves with kindness and understanding. We give ourselves a break. We give ourselves a little bit of grace, okay? And then we change our focus to progress, not perfection. I know it's easier said than done. I know it is. But we have to look and go, we have to look at progress as the goal, not perfection. So I didn't get to do the next week's worth of work early, but I did get the assignment done in time, and I wasn't at the computer 5 minutes before it was due submitting it. It was done by shortly after dinner time or right before dinner time, and I was able to stop and take a brain break. So we change our focus to progress as the goal instead of perfection. So I can't run like I did 10 years ago, but I can still get better every day. So now the new goal is to do better than the day before. And that's where those quotes come from that tell you to compare yourself not to anybody else, but to the person you were yesterday. Again, slippery slope, but if my goal is to do better than the day before, that's a progress goal. That's not a perfection goal, right? Okay, so, and then the self-care, again, another shocker. Self-care is big, important here. All of these things I just talked about, awareness, mindfulness, self-talk, self-compassion, changing the focus to progress, those all start with self-care, which means we got to know when to quit. We got to know when we've lost too much sleep, when we need a break. I remember when a loved one passed away a few years ago, and I was the only staff person at my job, and I was getting ready for an event, and I just would not stop because I was taking so much personal responsibility for this event and what was going on, and I would not stop, which means I also wasn't stopping to grieve. And so that person passed away on a Thursday, and Monday, after the event, after everything was done, I walked into work, and I was there about an hour, and I called my board members, and I said, and I was a mess. And I said, I can't do it. I got to take a couple days off. Nobody cared. Literally nobody cared. And what I mean when I say nobody cared is everybody got it. They were like, yeah, take a couple days off. Do what you need to do. I spent 4 days in autopilot trying to function through because my personal responsibility for my job was so great that I wasn't taking care of myself. And boy, did that erupt like a pressure cooker on Monday morning. In fact, I don't even remember. It may have taken me till Tuesday before I just completely fell apart. So if we don't do that self-care, then that pressure keeps building and building and building. And then when outside life pressure hits us, as it inevitably will, we explode like a geyser. We just, that's it. Doesn't take that much when we're putting all that pressure on ourselves already. So my final story, and I told you this was probably going to run a little bit long, but when I have stories, it often does. One of the things that this Psychology Today article talks about, let me go back to this one, is, where's it at? Let me see if I can find it. Okay, so this is what she says. And if you're a person of faith, you'll understand this. I have a little bit of a story about this. But when it comes to self-compassion and taking some of that pressure off of ourselves, one of the things that's talked about in this article, she says, you can, I think it's a she. She says, yes. Well, Devin, that could go either way. Devin says, you can take this one step further by imagining your higher self, and that's a reference to you, as a caregiver. What would you do as a caregiver when you're taking care of other people? Visualize climbing into your higher self's lap and getting soothed. Take deep breaths and feel that embrace. This visualization gives you an experience of loving kindness that we so often deprive ourselves. If you're a person of faith, and I know I don't dig into faith too much on these, but if you are a person of faith, or if you're not, if whatever your faith is, whatever the higher power is to you, you can apply this there too. I had someone describe to me a long time ago about their experience in seeking the face of their higher power. In this case, it was God. And because I'm never here to judge you for whatever your beliefs are. So whatever your higher power is, this person described to me that turning to God was like climbing into her father's lap. Which is kind of what Devin describes here in terms of climbing into the lap of your higher self as a caregiver, okay? But I actually had that experience a couple years later, and I didn't know how to articulate it. But I had my own come to Jesus sort of thing. And I was in a really dark place. And I was about to do something really stupid that would have had lifelong impact. And I went and dug my grandfather's Bible, my great-grandfather's Bible, out of the closet. And I sat down on my bed and I just started opening it. I started reading it. And then, of course, there was the breakdown and the discussion with God and the prayer and all of that. And the end result was that in that moment, I understood what that person meant when they explained this to me, because I felt like I had climbed into my father's lap and gotten the soothing and the calming and the it's going to be okay that I needed. And I was a completely different person the next morning. So, whether you choose to make that your higher self like Devin suggests, or your higher power, whatever that is, whoever that is, that's the best way to start with self-compassion, is to recognize that you have limits, and that you cannot do everything, that you cannot be everything to anyone. You are not pizza. You cannot make everyone happy. You're also not ice cream, in case pizza doesn't make everybody happy. You're not pizza or ice cream. You cannot make everyone happy. Look at the deadlines that you are facing. Are they self-set deadlines, or are they someone else's? Is anybody going to die? Are there any, like when your kids were upset when they were little? Did you die? Is anything broken? Are you bleeding? If those things, if it's not life-altering that you don't hit that deadline, maybe you need to reevaluate that deadline. Because if you're looking down the barrel of 10 deadlines, they're all at the same time, something's got to give. And if something doesn't give, it's going to be you that does. So, I hope you found that helpful. My challenge to you is to stop shooting all over yourself. What I mean by that is sometime this week, I want you to notice where you're using the terms I should have, or I should. Could be past tense, could be present tense, whatever. Wherever you're using the words I should have or I should, then maybe just notice it. Maybe just make a note. Keep a notebook, mark the time, mark the date, mark the context, whatever. Sit down, journal about it. Share it in comments. Send it to be my messenger, I was doing really good. I didn't think I knew what you were talking about, but 3 days after your video, I was shooting all over myself all day. Seriously, that's my challenge to you. Find it, because until you find it, until you become aware of it, you can't stop it. All right? So notice where you do this. Journal about it. Like I said, shoot me a message, drop a comment, whatever. Because I'm not telling you to do anything but notice it and journal it, because you can't fix it until you notice it. Noticing it sometimes is hard enough. But try to replace it when the word should comes to mind. If it's should have, well, I can't do anything about that now. And that's what I had to keep telling myself. I can't do anything about that now. I got to focus on now. When I say I should, okay, but that's not on today's list. I can't make time for that today. We'll look at that later. That's how we redirect, so that we can keep focusing on what we're doing, so that we don't get into that negative brain spin that adds all that pressure and turns up that pressure cooker. So that's my challenge to you. Stop shooting all over yourself. Just start by noticing where you do it and making a note about it, or journaling about it, or reflecting on it, or sharing it with me, whatever you're comfortable with. Remember these things. The urge to push yourself to be better can be argued as a gift, not a flaw, but everything in moderation, because we can use that urge to push ourselves to be better. It can be very motivational until it's not, until it becomes the heat in that pressure cooker. You can use self-criticism for development. Self-criticism is okay, but not self-degradation, and that's a fine line. So how we talk to ourselves matter. If we say, okay, I'm not as good at, this could have been better, so I'm going to work to make it better tomorrow, or I'm going to work to make it better in the next hour, fine. But if it turns into, this could have been better, and I suck, and I should have done this, and I'm no good at this, and I don't know what I'm thinking, like I did with my paper, where once again I found myself questioning whether I was totally on the wrong path. That's when it becomes self-degradation. And that's when how you talk to yourself matters. Okay? Breaking these patterns takes time, y'all. This is my final thought for you. Sometimes the pressure we feel isn't about failing. It's about trying to hold on to something perfectly. And it takes time to break those patterns because we've been holding on to whatever that is, that streak, that pen, that responsibility. We've been holding on to it for a really long time. And it's going to get heavy. And it takes time for us to learn that it's okay sometimes to put it down. Which also doesn't mean it can't be picked back up when we need to. All right, so that's it. That's it for today. I hope you got something out of it. I know it was a little long today. I'll get it uploaded to YouTube within the next hour or so. And I will drop the video from last week, and I will also drop the one from 2023 called Great Expectations. If you found this helpful, please share. I haven't seen a whole lot of comments this morning, so I hope you've been commenting and making comments, and I will come respond to them because Facebook's not showing them to me today. And again, my challenge, stop shoulding all over yourself. The only way to stop is to start noticing where you do that. That's the first step, is awareness every time. I love you. I hope you have a fabulous week. I hope you don't should over yourself at all. And until next week, again, if you found this helpful, please share it so that somebody else can see it too. And until next week, be well.